Today we're talking about what happens when you split the brain and what happens and how it shows, rather, that reality is not material. Now, what does that mean? What are we talking about? We're looking at neurosurgeon Michael Egnor, who went from a materialist, the belief that reality is completely material and nothing more, to an idealist view, the view that reality is completely mind, which is, of course, the view of Hyperianism. And the reason why that he made this switch from materialism to idealism has to do with his work as a neurosurgeon, his experiments, or rather understanding and work with the brain, which includes split brain surgery. Taking a look at this interview with Michael Egnor, who is a neurosurgeon, and I'm just going to be reading the parts when Michael Egnor is speaking. But here's the thing that I want to get across. As I said in the beginning, Michael Egnor was an atheistic materialist, and then through various ways, various things, including his work in neurosurgery, he became an idealist. Now, Hyperianism is an idealism, which is that all reality is mind, not matter. So we agree there. But here's the unfortunate thing. Michael Egnor went a little too far, because he went from atheistic materialism to Christian idealism, which is horrible. So, you know, there's this big false dichotomy that's out there, is that people think that they have to choose between mainstream religion or scientific atheistic materialism. You see a lot of people who leave Christianity and they automatically become atheistic materialists. And then you see some atheists who discover that there's more to reality than the physical, and then they become Christian or some other mainstream religion. It's not one or the other. You can understand that reality is not physical, but is in fact a mathematical reality in which we are the conscious creators of. And what we're going to see is that what Michael believes is that everything is mind, which is true, but that we exist within the mind of God. Now, of course, this is not true at all unless you understand that we as a collective are God. And then in that case, it is very much true that we exist in the mind of God, but that's not in some kind of external creator God, has nothing to do with Christianity at all, but rather it is simply a construction that we have constructed out of our collective thought forms, our collective energy, our collective frequencies. You know, to be more mathematically precise, it's constructed out of Fourier basis waves interacting together into a space-time representation, if you take the transform of that. So he gets very close, but then just, you know, unfortunately goes off the rails. He's also, because he is a Christian pro-lifer and all this, so I definitely don't agree with what a lot of things Michael Egnor has to say. However, he does have a lot of interesting things to say regarding his discoveries that reality is not material, because he is very, very right about that, and going so far as showing that, you know, talking about how reality is all mind. But it's very sad how you can get someone who is, you know, seemingly very intellectual and whatnot, being able to understand that reality isn't material, but then falling afoul of that great false dichotomy that everyone seems to get caught up in. Just because reality is not material, you don't have to automatically go, so God. No. So us. Anyway, before I, you know, go too far there, let's just start taking a look at this and understanding the oh, hey, Mint Bunny, thank you so much for the super chat. We miss you too. I hope you're doing well. Thank you. So let's take a look at Michael talking about why he thinks that reality is mind and what it has to do with split brain theory, or split brain surgery, etc. So this is Michael Egnor saying, I think the strongest argument from science for idealism, which is, remember, idealism is the position that all of reality is mind, that there is no such thing as matter in and of itself, that everything is mind, and that what we think of as matter is just a representation or transformation of mind. Kind of how like water can become ice if it, you know, goes through a phase change. So I think the strongest argument from science for idealism, that all reality is mind, is an observation that I heard about years ago. And that is, when you look at the world on the quantum mechanical level, matter disappears. That is, in its most basic detailed reality, the quantum world, Nature is an idea. It's not material. And that's absolutely true. And a lot of people get confused when you say something like, nature is an idea, it's not material, because people are so used to thoughts being transient and material being stable. You have a thought, it rises and it disappears. It seems like this sort of ghostly thing that doesn't really truly exist. But you look at things like tables and chairs and trees that are apparently material and they're stable, they're there all the time. So people often wonder, like, well, what do you mean that reality is an idea? What do you mean that reality is not material? And that's why you have idea right in idealism, because reality is mind, it's an idea. But here's what it really means, okay? So when you get down to it, we want to look at what the basic constituents of reality are. And when you look at the quantum mechanical level, you start to realize that particles do not behave like particles anymore. Instead, you see that they are reliant on waves, that waves are an integral part of how they interact and how they behave. So we start to see, when we get to the quantum mechanical level, that it is very wave reliant, it is very wave like, and you can't understand quantum mechanics without waves. But the problem is, and the whole notion of matter starts to disappear, because instead of talking about material particles anymore, you're talking about things like wave packets, and you're dealing with it all comes to interactions of things like the wave function. But here's the thing. Science, these waves, when people think of waves, they may think of like water waves or sound waves or something like that. But when you deal with quantum mechanics, these waves are not physical, right? These are not physical waves. They are not made out of anything. So what this ultimately means at the quantum mechanical level, you have reality that is based on waves that aren't physical. So what we understand in Hyperianism is what these waves are, what these frequencies are. Well, they're mind. That's why they're not physical. They're mental waves. So we understand in Hyperianism mind as being frequency patterns, as being sinusoidal waves, literally sine and cosine waves generated by Euler's formula, which we call the source formula. They're waveforms. If you want to be really precise, they're actually flowing points following a wave trajectory, but we don't have to really get into the details of that, just to know that it is waveforms. So when you say that, and this is thought. And the reason why that it is thought is because it's not related to space-time. It can exist independently of space-time. And it has a net result of 0 as well. So it is dimensionless with respect to space-time as a whole, net across its entirety. So what this means is that when we say something like reality is an idea, well, you have to understand what thought is. Thought are waves. That's it. So when you have a particular thought in mind, you are forming a thought structure, which is a wave structure, and then it can, let's say you close your eyes and imagine an apple in your mind right now. You are forming a thought structure of that apple via your constituent sinusoidal waveforms that exist within you as a mind. That's what happens. You are constructing a wave structure, and then when you stop thinking about that apple, well, that wave structure goes away. It doesn't vanish, it just deconstructs. Now, the difference between you imagining an apple and a real apple sitting in front of you, now I want to say real just because it's a shared experience, because the apple in your head, it's still real. It's not magic. There's actually a process in constructing it and deconstructing it. Just because it's a thought doesn't mean it's not real. It's very real. It's just subjective in that you are the only one experiencing it, not a multiplicity. Now, when we come into the space-time universe, which we call the holos, and there's an apple sitting on the table, there's the only fundamental difference between the apple sitting on the table and the apple in your mind. Well, except that the apple in your mind is an image, doesn't actually contain all the details that a real apple does. You're just conjuring an image. But that being said, you get the point. The difference, not the only difference, all right, take the word only out of there. The difference, one of the differences between the apple sitting on the table and the apple that you imagine in your head is that apple on the table is a collective experience, that other minds can experience it, while the one in your head cannot. Now, the reason why that is the case is because this reality that we exist in together isn't formed just by your sinusoids. just by your basis frequencies. It's a result of all of our frequencies, or all minds' frequencies, interacting together. Now, this is why we can all experience something objectively, and it's why that apple is stable. The apple in your mind is there when you're thinking about it and not there when you're not thinking about it, or constructs and deconstructs. But the apple on the table is always there. And the reason why it's always there is because it's formed out of every single sinusoid, or every single mind interacting together to construct that particular wave structure. So it's not dependent on you. Your wave contribution to that is infinitesimal. And so you have these sort of autonomous wave structures that are stable and persistent through time, because it's not just dependent upon you. It forms a stable structure because it is a product of all minds in existence. All right. And this was unconsciously generated at the Big Bang. And so the Big Bang event, people go, well, what came before the Big Bang? Before the Big Bang, it was a domain of pure mind, sinusoids that had no non-orthogonal phase relations. Then by introducing phase, asymmetry occurs, and you start getting extension with regard to space and time. And that's the Big Bang. The Big Bang is the beginning of the collective dream. Just like when you go to sleep and dream at night, you have dreams. Well, the collective, the monadic collective, all of us working together, the Big Bang was the start of this collective dream. And it's just a very long, persistent dream, because it depends on each and every single one of us and every mind in existence. It's not something that just goes away. It is stable. So the reason why I took some time to point that out is because people get so confused when you go, reality is an idea. It sounds so abstract. Like, what do you mean? That cup on my table isn't an idea? Well, yes, it actually is. If you understand an idea to be a structure of thought, that cup on your table is a structure of thought. And it might seem very weird to people, because imagine that, it's kind of like water and ice is a great way to imagine it. Imagine that you were walking around in an ice world. I know it sounds kind of weird, but imagine you're walking around, everything's made of ice. Everything is solid and persistent. And you've only really experienced ice. And then someone's, well, guess what? All this ice, it's actually water. You're like, well, no, it's not. Water flows and it moves and it changes. Ice is stable. Ice is always there. It's not water, but it actually is. It's just water that has been transformed in such a way so that it is stable. Same thing with matter. Matter is just thought, mind, that has been collectively transformed, literally via Fourier transform, so that it is a stable space-time function. So I think it's important to understand what it means by saying that nature is an idea, because a lot of people pass over that. It's like, oh, that's just some garbage that some philosopher said, dude. Like, or they, well, I don't know, that's just some airy thing that doesn't really have any meaning. No, it's very real and it's very true, and it is the essence of reality. But let's go on, because Michael Egnor, neuroscientist or neurosurgeon, is talking about this, and so he's continuing to go on to talk about quantum mechanics, where he states, electrons are not little balls of things, and electrons are one of the fundamental particles of space-time. So electrons aren't little balls of things. People think of electrons as being, or matter in general as being these hard little billiard balls, sort of bumping into each other and forming clusters. That's not true. That's old. That's classical mechanics. That's Newtonian mechanics. If you still visualize reality of being like these little hard pellets that bump around and form clusters and structures, that's known to be false for over 100 years now. Okay, so I was in I want to say 1921, where de Broglie discovered matter waves. In essence, no, they're not little balls of things colliding. They're wave structures. So electrons are not little balls of things. Electrons are ideas. They're ideas expressed by equations. Hey, look at that. Yeah, so what do we say? Reality is based on frequencies, thoughts, mind, that are generated by the source formula, an equation, which is, e to the ix equals cosine x plus I sine x. This is a mathematical reality. You see how it all fits together. Mathematics, mind, They're one and the same, but it's alive. There's a way to, it's not dead mathematics, it's living frequency patterns that are qualitative frequencies, and they have experiences bound up with them. And so you can see, it's just kind of sad, really. You have this seemingly very intuitive, intelligent individual, Michael, who is coming to these very, very profound conclusions, but you didn't have to go all the way to Jesus. So anyway, electrons are ideas. They're ideas expressed by equations. For example, when you look in a reference book and it gives you the mass of an electron, it doesn't say which electron. If you want to know the mass of a billiard ball, a pool ball, any kind of ball, really, you have to say which one, because they're all a little different from each other, right? So, if you have a bunch of billiard balls, they're all going to be different because they all have some like manufacturing difference. They're not all exactly identical. But when it comes to electron, there isn't any difference. There's one mass. People have even said, do we know that there isn't more than just one electron? Could it just be one electron that's popping up everywhere? So the whole notion of individuation of matter disappears at the quantum level, which is a very idealistic, meaning idealistic in terms of reality being mind, way of looking at the world. I think quantum mechanics is sort of the scientific expression of idealism, and it's a powerful argument. So you really can make a case that matter is in the mind because quantum mechanics is all mind. Now, a couple different things that I think is really interesting. So first of all, he says, I think quantum mechanics is sort of a scientific expression of idealism, and it definitely can be looked at that way, except scientists don't want to admit that. That's why so many people, look, if you're not familiar with quantum mechanics, go do a little studying. Just watch some documentaries. It's not going to be right. It's not going to be accurate because documentaries bastardize quantum mechanics really bad. But just to get out of the Newtonian way of thinking, if you think reality is classical little bits bumping around into each other, again, you're 100 years in the past, over 100 years in the past. Just go watch it. Even if the documentaries are bad, just go watch a couple documentaries or something on quantum mechanics, just so you have an idea of what's going on. And but the problem is that Egnor is saying that it's a scientific expression of reality being mind. In and of itself, that is true. But the problem is that scientific materialists don't want to admit that. That's why they can't understand quantum mechanics. So go watch a documentary on quantum mechanics. What you're going to see is they're going to say over and over again is that nobody understands quantum mechanics. Scientists are baffled by quantum mechanics. The results of quantum mechanics don't make sense. It's impossible. It's a mystery. The reason why is because they don't want to admit that reality is mind. You see, that's why it's so strange, so hard to understand, seemingly doesn't make sense, seemingly is contradictory. It's not contradictory. It's of course going to be contradictory if it says that reality is based on waves, but you don't want to admit that reality is waves. Then you have this weird paradoxical situation where reality is based on this thing that you don't want to admit is real. So you're like, well, I guess reality is based on an unreal probability wave function. Yeah, it doesn't make sense because it's these waves that you don't want to admit are real are the foundation of reality. So again, go watch some documentaries, go see it, and when you see it, you'll see it'll say, scientists have no idea what quantum mechanics is. For over 100 years, they've been trying to figure it out. It's because they don't want to admit that reality is mind. If you admit that reality is mind, quantum mechanics is not difficult. I mean, it may take time to construct a intricate model that reflects certain things, but that's not the understanding idea. The idea of what quantum mechanics is, it's not hard at all. The fact that it's based on waves, that's easily understandable. The fact that quantum entanglement entails non-locality, that's easily understandable because mind automatically entails non-locality. All these elements of quantum mechanics are easily explained once you understand that idealism is true and materialism is false. But materialists can't get away from that, so they come up with crazy ideas like the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is like, oh, well, maybe there's a universe for every possible trajectory that the particle could take because we don't want to admit that it has an internal aspect to it. So maybe there's a universe for every possible choice that could ever be made. No, they come up with these crazy wild ideas that don't work, that are logically inconsistent, logically unsound, rationally fall apart because they don't want to admit reality is mind. So, and then Egnor goes on to say, so you really can make a case that matter is in the mind because quantum mechanics is all mind. And that's really cool. That's the thing to understand. People think that, you know, we are sort of these minds within matter, when the truth is that matter is in mind. That's a really important distinction to make. Matter is in mind. That's another thing that people have a really hard time with going, you know, the one before it was, how can matter be an idea? What do you mean nature is idea? But we saw, you know, if we understand it as frequencies, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. But, especially with the results of quantum mechanics. But, what about this idea of matter is in mind? What does that mean? Well, it's like a dream. Think about when you go to sleep and dream. If you go to sleep and dream, you think that you're in a world of matter, right? Yeah. Unless you're lucid, you think that that's real as the table in front of you. You behave like it is. You follow the dream narrative. You think you are in a real material world, but it's all in your mind. Matter in mind. Now, the holos that we all exist in together, same thing, except it's a collective dream. It's in all of our minds. We're all sharing it. It's not a single player game. It's a multiplayer game. And so matter is in mind, just like a dream. The only difference is this is a dream. It's just a shared dream. It's a collective dream. It's a long dream, and it's a stable dream because we're all contributing to it and we're all experiencing it. And so it persists across space and time as this evolving mathematical structure that's ultimately trying to figure itself out. Ultimately, it wants to realize that it's dreaming. It's trying to wake up. It's trying to become lucid, like in a lucid dream. That's what's happening right now. Imagine that you're having a dream and you think it's real. And there are these dream characters going, hey, this is a dream. Wake up. This is a dream. Wake up. This is a dream. Well, hey, guess what? I'm sitting here in front of you right now. Wake up. This is a dream. The reality is generating modes of consciousness, avatars for us to localize into, to understand ourselves, to realize what we are. We have been thrust into this dream unconsciously, but now it's time to become lucid. Now it's time to wake up, because guess what? We can transform the world when that happens. All the bullshit around you, all the hatred, violence, sexism, racism, all that disgusting element to reality. We can end it if everyone realizes that we're all in this together, that this is a place that we have constructed in order to learn and grow together, and we can start building a world based on that instead of money and power. We can base it on true power. Knowledge is power. We can have a world of knowledge, learning, love, and compassion. We can have it all. And it's not a crazy idea. It's not utopian. It's why we're here. So let's continue, because we're talking about other things today. So the whole notion of so from that perspective, I think idealism is true, and I think it is in some way the best way of looking at nature. So this is Michael Egnor continuing, saying that he thinks that the idea that reality is all mind is the best way to understand and look at nature. But there are aspects, particularly of the mind-brain relationship, that strongly support it. And this is a neurosurgeon. You mentioned split brain surgery, which is endlessly fascinating stuff. So now we're actually going to talk about split brain surgery, which, hey, that's the topic today. So we're actually going to talk about the topic. Surprise, right? So Michael says, I've operated on and worked with split brain patients over the years. And Sperry, so Sperry is Roger Sperry, who was a neurophysiologist who did research on split brain theory, or split brain surgery. Try and say that 3 times fast. It's difficult, so I apologize. But hey, I will persevere. So Sperry, who did research on split brain surgery, found that perceptual disconnections that were very subtle and very difficult to find. That's why he won the Nobel Prize. They weren't obvious. It took a lot of very subtle research to find it. The most remarkable thing about these people is that they're no different, right? So this is people who have split brain surgery. They're no different after the surgery than they are before the hemispheres of the brain are functionally disconnected. So you have the two hemispheres of the brain, left brain, right hemisphere, split brain surgery. They are functionally disconnected, but the people are no different after the surgery than they are before, and they're the same person. And so Michael Egnor goes on, think about this. He says, it would be as if you took a chainsaw to your computer and cut it in half, and it still worked just fine. Imagine that, or taking your smartphone, cutting it in half, and it's still working just fine. That's what split brain surgery is like. So Michael goes on, and that's an awfully strange thing. Yeah, it is. Kind of hard to make sense of in the way that materialists perceive and understand and conceptualize the brain. So it was so strange that it led Sperry to reject materialism. He had no use for the materialist view at all. And let me remind you that Roger Sperry did such immensely important work on this that he won the Nobel Prize. And his research, what he discovered, led him to reject materialism, that the world was matter. He absolutely rejected it and had no use for the materialist view at all. So when it comes to split brain surgery, what splits is only perception, but intellect doesn't split. A sense of self doesn't split. The will doesn't split. Now, why is that? Now, intuitively, you might kind of think that makes sense. But think about it. Why do you think it makes sense? Why does that make sense to you? If you have a brain, and according to materialists, okay, according to materialists, those who believe that the world is matter and only matter, they believe that the brain is the mind. That it's the same thing. They could just swap the words around, that the brain is the mind. That's what they believe. So if you have split brain surgery and functionally sever, you're essentially splitting the brain in half. If you were doing that, why is it, if it's the same, if the mind is the same thing as the brain, why is your sense of self and your intellect and your will, why does that not split? Your perception splits. The way you perceive things, the way you experience things changes. But your will, your sense of self, and intellect does not split. So this makes perfect sense with respect to Hyperianism. Why? Because in Hyperianism, you are not your brain. What are you? You are an eternal monadic mind, a monad, an eternal mind. That's what we call it. It is a system of frequency patterns. We were talking about frequency before. Each one of us is an eternal monadic mind, which is a system of frequencies. Not a physical being, mental frequencies, Fourier basis waves. The brain, nervous system, and the body, well, particularly the brain and nervous system, is what you as a mind interfaces with in order to localize in the space-time domain. And all this fits together. We're talking about quantum mechanics and non-locality. The mind is a non-local entity. And an avatar, a body, is what allows the mind to localize, to experience a local reality, a localized reality, to experience a material independent existence. Well, a material, independent, localized existence. And what happens here is that since the brain and body and nervous system are providing data to the monadic mind, this has to do with your perceptual field, all your sensations of the material world, but not your sense of self, not your will. These elements are functions of you as a mind. Now, of course, there's a feedback loop. Okay? Certain things can influence your sense of self. Certain things can, say, influence your intellect. But Michael is going to go on to explain exactly what he means. So Egnor continues talking about split brain patients. Is what it's saying is that the perceptual disconnection is there, because the sensitive soul, which is the material powers of the brain, is split. The sensitive powers of the soul are split, so perception is split. But intellect and will, which are immaterial powers of the soul, cannot be split, and indeed they are not split with split brain surgery. So it's beautiful work. It's fascinating. Okay, so let's break down what he's saying, because remember, Michael Egnor realized that reality wasn't material, and he realized it was all mind, idealist. But he went from atheistic materialism to a Christian ideology. Now, his Christian ideology is a much more intelligent one than when you'll find in mainstream Christianity. It's like an Aristotelian perspective. So it's intelligent. It's an intelligent form of it. As intelligent as Christian theology can actually be. Christian theology, very intellectual Christian theology, is a lot more. It's actually pretty intelligent. It's just at some point they go way off the rails when they start bringing all this crazy religiosity into it. So it's unfortunate because you have intelligent people like Michael Egnor who get into it and bring intelligence to it, but then it just goes way off the train because they start to believe that they have to believe in things like crazy conceptions of a creator God and everything that else comes with Christianity just because materialism isn't true. You don't have to do that. It's living frequency. It's living mathematics. It's mind. It's what we all are. It's not God. We are God. We are the creators. We are the unconscious generators of this reality. But anyway, so what he's saying here with regard to split brain is that, so he's talking in terms of what he believes. So he's saying that the reason why there's a perceptual disconnection is because that's the sensitive soul, which is the material powers of the brain, is split. And the sensitive powers of the soul are split, so perception is split. But intellect and will are immaterial powers of the soul, which cannot be split. And indeed, they are not split with split brain surgery. So he believes in this idea of the soul that has sort of two functional aspects to it. And one part has to do with perception, and another part has to do with the immaterial powers, such as like will and intellect and sense of self. Now, see, here's the thing. He thought that he had to go to like a Christianized Aristotelian idea of the soul to be able to explain that. You don't have to do that. You can just go with Hyperianism and ontological mathematics, a mathematical idealism. You don't need to bring these ideas into it that rely on a religious sensibility. You can reinterpret it, all that, in terms of ontological mathematics. The reason why that there is a perceptual disconnection is because the brain is what allows an immaterial mind to experience the world. It's kind of like this. Let's say you put on a VR headset. That VR headset is going to let you experience the VR world. If that VR headset gets damaged, you're going to have a distorted view, a distorted perception of the material world, or of that VR world. But your sense of self and intellect are still there and intact. So that's what's happening here. When the brain is, someone is going through split brain surgery, the reason why their perception is distorted is because what is getting severed has to do with the apparatus that is designed to give you a perceptual experience of the world. But it isn't touching that which interfaces with it, which is what you truly are as an immaterial mind. You are a frequency function, which is a mind, interacting with a space-time function, the brain, and by extension, the nervous system and the body. So the other thing that I think is absolutely fascinating is an observation by Wilder Penfield, the pioneer in seizure surgery back in the 20th century. Penfield noted that there are no intellectual seizures. That is, when people have seizures, the seizure is a kind of random stochastic activation of the brain. Electrical impulses get going and they can happen anywhere, do anything. It can make your arm jerk, can make you fall down unconscious. It can make you see flashes of light. It can make you have emotional experiences. It can make you have memories and smells. Except people never have intellectual content. People never think abstractly during a seizure, and that's remarkable. No one ever does calculus as part of a seizure, or even simple arithmetic. No one ever adds 1 + 1 repeatedly as a seizure. No one ever contemplates justice or mercy as a seizure. But practically anything else you can think of has been described. And Penfield said, why not? Again, that's a very important point. If someone is having a seizure and you're having this, all of these electrical impulses, stochastic electrical impulses of the brain, random, seemingly random, it's really pseudo-random, but you know what I mean, impulses of the brain, it's causing everything that the brain has to do with to go off and fire. Arms jerking, seeing flashes of lights, etc. But why nothing dealing with abstract thought? Why doesn't someone start adding 1 + 1 + 1 + 1? Why doesn't someone start, having some sort of abstract function go off? Well, if the mind is just a brain, you think it would, but it doesn't. It never does. And that's because that is not the function of the brain. That is the function of you as an immaterial mind. Now, a brain can help facilitate this process, but the brain doesn't create it. So look up if you want to know more about this, look up my video on brain filter theory. So what the brain does is it allows a mind, as we said, to connect to an avatar, but what it's doing is that it's filtering the mind. It's not generating the mind. So the brain doesn't generate abstract thought. It can allow abstract thought to occur within the filter that it's providing. So you see the difference? The brain is important. Obviously, there are, certain animals, a lot of animals, most animals aren't having abstract thoughts. Well, that's because their brain is filtering out that functionality. So when humans evolve, it's not that their brain has evolved to generate abstract reason. It's their brain has evolved to allow for that function to occur. So anyway, again, the reason why someone is having a seizure and abstract thought isn't occurring, again, think about like a VR headset. It's not a perfect analogy, okay? It's not a perfect analogy. But if your VR headset is malfunctioning, you're going to be seeing a bunch of weird stuff. Your game character might be flailing around. But you yourself is intact. So if most of the brain is devoted to abstract thought, right? If most of the brain is devoted to abstract thought, why wouldn't an occasional seizure fire off an occasional abstract thought? And it never does. And that's exactly what Aristotle would have said. Abstract thought is not material and doesn't come from the brain. Correct. It comes from you as an immaterial mind. The brain can allow for it to happen as within the filter that it's providing, but it doesn't generate it. The brain conditions our ability to think. See, the huge part. Scientific materialists have this idea that brains generate thought. No, it conditions our ability to think. It filters and provides context. The brain conditions our ability to think. Abstractly, if you drink a lot of alcohol, you're not going to be able to think abstractly as well as if you don't. But the actual cause of the abstract thought is not the brain. It doesn't come from the brain. You see the big difference here is that you can impair your ability to reason and have abstract thought by, through brain impairment. But that's because the brain acts as a conditioning system and filter for your mind where abstract thought comes from. It doesn't create it, it doesn't generate it, but it still conditions it. There's still a interface, an interaction going on. There has to be, because that's the function of the brain. It's allow you as an immaterial mind it interfaces with it to allow you to access the material world. So yeah, brain impairment can impair your ability to for abstract thought, but that doesn't mean that the brain generates abstract thought. So when a seizure is happening and it's causing things associated with what the brain does, and because the brain is associated with the material world, Michael Egnor is saying, well, how come abstract thought never occurs? And he's saying that's because Abstract thought is not a function of the brain as far as generation goes. The brain only conditions abstract thought. And then, like in Hyperianism, also we would say it filters thought. But then again, there are thoughts that are caused by the brain, but they're not abstract. They're emotions, they're perceptions, they are movements. So, because again, it doesn't mean that the brain has nothing to do with thought. If you have a certain emotion, that can cause you to think in a certain way. If you're feeling very sad, you're going to, be thinking in a different way than you would be thinking very happily if you were very happy. But thoughts conditioned by emotions is not the same as purely abstract thought. Purely abstract thought is like when you do mathematics, when you're dealing with the form of things, when you're contemplating philosophically, what is justice? What is right? What is wrong? What are ethics? What is care? When you're doing calculus, these are abstract thoughts. Whereas you can have thoughts conditioned by emotions. You can have thoughts conditioned by perceptions. If you see a tiger running towards you, well, you might start thinking a little differently than you would if you're in a calm meadow. And that's why that's because of natural selection and evolution. Your brain has developed to condition yourself to operate in a certain way for your survival. So if the brain starts generating fear, you're going to be thinking in a certain way to evacuate. So the dichotomy between perception and cognition is very real, right? The dichotomy between what you perceive, what you feel, what you sense, and what you can abstractly think. There's this dichotomy here. It's very real in neuroscience. And the only metaphysical framework that also has that dichotomy is the Aristotelian Thomistic understanding of the soul. Now, that's not true. Michael simply has not heard of Hyperianism in ontological mathematics. So do you see, this is where Michael Egnor, this is the huge false dichotomy. Like he even says here, this dichotomy is real, the perception and cognition, but the dichotomy I'm talking about is a dichotomy between atheistic materialism and religion, mainstream religion at least. Because in Michael's case, we're talking about Christianity. So Michael sees all this evidence through his work in neuroscience and neurosurgery. He sees all this evidence that reality is not material, and that it points to a world of mind. And so he goes, well, shit, how can I explain this? And what does he do? Well, he goes, well, the only thing that can explain this is the Aristotelian Thomistic understanding of the soul, which is incorporated in like a Thomistic view of Christianity. And that's not true. Hyperianism explains this much better than an Aristotelian view, because we have the actual mathematics in forms of the Fourier transform and the source formula. Like, you don't have to be talking about like the sensitive soul and the rational soul, blah, blah, blah. No, you can talk about Fourier basis waves and inverse Fourier transforms, taking frequency functions and representations with space-time functions. What is the brain? It's a space-time function. What is the mind? It's a frequency function. How do they interface? They're both mathematics, so so there's no substance dualism, so they absolutely can interface. So a frequency function interacts with a space-time function. You don't have to make any sort of appeal to a creator god, or even in like the Aristotelian view of God. We are God. It's us. So Michael Egnor says, I say this humorously, but I actually believe it. First of all, I think idealism, that reality is all mind, is best understood as Augustine said, that creation is thought in the mind of God. So Michael says, we in the universe, we inhabit our thoughts in God's mind. They're quite real because they're thoughts in God's mind. That's an idealistic understanding of metaphysics. But I would say tongue-in-cheek that God is a Thomist. That is, that the structure in the divine mind hews rather closely to that view. So my problem with the Cartesian view is that Cartesian metaphysics is so raw in so many ways. I can't accept the mind-body metaphysical aspect of such an inadequate metaphysics. In so many other ways, it's just great. So basically, he's saying, like, well, I can't take a Cartesian view because he can't accept the mind-body metaphysical aspect of it, and it's inadequate. Hyperianism agrees. So the metaphysics of Cartesianism is that mind and matter are two distinct separate substances. And that's not Hyperianism. That's not idealism. Idealism says that matter is a transformation of mind. Now, Cartesian idealism is separate. It says that there are actually two different things, matter and mind, and that mind can interact with matter by inhabiting a body. But you see, there's a difference. Matter is something that's truly, truly different from mind in that perspective. In Hyperianism and idealism, that's not the case. Matter is just mind from another perspective. Matter is just the space-time representation of mind. Just like how ice is the solid form of water. A bit like that. But in Cartesian dualism, they're truly independent, separate things. You have all kinds of problems that arise from that. Most famously, the Cartesian problem of substance dualism, which if they're two separate things, how do they interact? How do they interface? If they're two separate things, which means they have nothing in common. That's what it means if it's a substance dualism. You have matter and mind. They have nothing in common. Then how do they interface? Because for an interface to occur, there has to be a connection point. But if there's nothing, literally nothing in common, there's no possibility for them to interface. So there's a lot of problems with Cartesian dualism, that one being the most famous. And I mean, that's as far as you need to go, really. I mean, that's a fatal error right there. I mean, there's a lot more fatal errors, but it's a fatal error right there. And that's what he says by I can't accept the mind-body metaphysical aspect of such an inadequate metaphysics. Well, how does Hyperianism deal with this? Easily. First of all reality is mind. And so let me just continue here. So, because Michael continues by saying, so for example, what is matter? That is if one comes from a Cartesian perspective, how does one explain? I mean, what is matter, right? So you have the problem of substance dualism. You have the problem of what is matter. And that's one of the reasons why Michael says, well, I'm not a dualist. I'm this, Thomist idealist. Well, right, we're not dualists either. It is. Michael's absolutely right. It is an inadequate metaphysics. So, but just to answer, in Hyperianism, the answer to Michael's questions are, first of all, so how do they interact? And what is matter? Well, we already defined what mind is. Mind is, well, it's reason as expressed through sinusoidal waveforms mathematically. So these are rational existence. They are pure mind. And I could go into exactly how that is logically necessary for the existence of reality, but that would take at least an hour. So you have mind, and mind is frequency. So it's mind, it's thought, it's frequency. Now, since we're understanding reality is mathematical, you can take a Fourier transform, particularly in inverse Fourier transform, and synthesize via synthesis equation. You can take these frequencies and have a space-time representation of them. So now you have functions in terms of space and time rather than in terms of frequency. So you have matter that is expressed as, you have frequency, you have mind that is expressed as matter. And if you want to know the mathematics behind that, to get like a very simplistic understanding of it, you can look at the Fourier transform of a constant whose phase spectrum is 0, which shows that when frequencies are completely and totally in harmony and in line with a 0 phase spectrum, you get a Dirac delta in space-time, which is a singularity. But once you start adding phase to it, you start getting extension with regard to the space-time representation. So anyway, long story short, matter is a different perspective, a different transformation, a representation of mind in the same way, not the same way, but analogous to how ice is a transformation of water. Whereas, that would seem very strange to someone to say that ice is water if someone didn't know the connection there. Or, you get what I mean. Obviously, you'd see it melting, but you know what I mean. In a thought experiment world. And so how does matter and mind interact? Well, quite easily. In a Cartesian substance dualism, there's no way to interface because they have nothing in common. Well, guess what? Space-time functions and frequency functions can interact. Why? Because they have something in common. What do they have in common? They're both functions. They're both mathematics. Mathematics, guess what? Mathematics can interact with mathematics. There's no problem there. There's only one substance and it can interact with itself. So it's perfect. It's perfect. It's kind of like water can interact with ice. You can have an ice cube floating in water. There's no problem because it's all the same thing. It's just different versions of itself interacting in the same way. And just like you can have an ice cube within water, you can have the material world within mind. And let's see. And yeah, okay, so that concludes, it's a very long article. If you want to read the whole thing, it's on mindmatters.ai. I really like this website a lot. I highly recommend it. I don't agree with everything on it, but it's great. But that's the case in point. Michael Egnor is a very intelligent individual. But unfortunately, now because he went from atheistic materialism, he fell afoul of that false dichotomy and went to a religiosity, a religion, a mainstream religion. And just because he thought that was the only thing that could explain idealism, which is not the case at all. It does not explain reality. It is a very illogical and irrational explanation once you start to identify with something about God that is not us. So, and also, and so then, Michael does get into like pro-life and all that stuff. In Hyperianism, we're absolutely pro-choice, and yeah, so it's unfortunate. I've talked about Michael before. It's sad because he's a very intuitive individual, but then goes over to that falls afoul of that terrible false dichotomy. But the thing to take away from this here is to really look at what a neurosurgeon has had to say. And it doesn't mean just because a neurosurgeon said it that it is true. I mean, look, you got a lot of things wrong too. Some big important things wrong. But it just goes to show that these are all things to help one see the importance of what we're talking about. When you start having neurosurgeons who are working on the brain, working with split brain patients and going, hey, I don't think the mind is the brain. That it starts to get pretty important here. And the world is very slowly but surely starting to wake up. They should not fall into religion. That's ridiculous. But they're starting to wake up. Michael Egnor should ditch Christianity and become Hyperion. It's much more effective and answers the questions that he has in a much more satisfactory and direct and complete and consistent way. And the great thing about this is, like I said, we're all in this dream. We're becoming lucid together. We're trying to become lucid. Michael is like slowly trying to open, but not quite there yet. And just like, like I said, if people in the dream are saying, hey, wake up, it's a dream. This is me right now telling you, hey, this is a dream. Wake up. And what I mean by wake up is become lucid, become conscious of it, become conscious of us. Freudian slip, but it's a true one. Become conscious of us, be conscious of it, of us as what we are. And together we can begin constructing this dream according to our will, not by using mind powers and making float or any bullshit. I don't care what, straw man argument some hater wants to say. That's not what we mean. We mean by actually making real world change through our collective will, which means going out, making real world change, building a better world, and constructing a world according to the fact that we are on a path to apotheosis. We are on a path to becoming gods individually and gods together as a collective. I don't really like using the term God too much, but we are the absolute. We are that structure of reality, actualizing ourselves. And we can build a world based on that knowledge. And guess what? Once we have that knowledge, once the world has that knowledge, we're not going to have unnecessary suffering. We'll get rid of all the hate, the racism, the sexism. There's always going to be, no one's perfect. The world, we can't just wave a magic wand and make it all go away. There'll still be issues, but we'll be working on them together as a whole because we know we're in this together. We'll be making strides and efforts to create that world where we all have exactly what we need to be able to actualize and grow. So we won't have a world based on money and bullshit and empty fast food, junk food, celebrity gossip, all that shit. No, the world won't be based on that. The world will be based on having meaningful experiences, learning and growing together, because now we know what we are, where we are, and why we are here, and we can finally start living. Like, this is not life. What we are doing right now, this is not life. This is not what it's meant to be. Once we know what we are, where we are, and why we're here, that's when it starts. That's when it begins. Now, you know I'm being a little hyperbolic here, because obviously this is life, and I'm not being literal in that case. But I mean, as far as getting to the point where we can really start to thrive, where we can really start to have these meaningful connections with each other, sharing our thoughts, sharing our knowledge, sharing talking about things that really truly matter, instead of like, oh, hey, what did you get at Target yesterday? Or did you see, the last episode of blah, blah, blah. What? No. Talking about our desires and our passions and our goals as God's becoming and creating. It's just, we will be able to have, just like when humanity went from an instinctual animalistic stage to self-awareness, look how reality changed. We had cities, we had civilizations, societies, technology, all this bloomed and burst forth. A lot of it led to bad things, but it was a completely altering of reality when self-awareness and new consciousness came into being. Now a new consciousness is coming into being right now as hyper-awareness through Hyperianism, through us, and the world will go through another utter transformation where it will be unrecognizable to what came before. And I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports on Patreon, especially Cassidy, Alana, Renaissance, Michael, Evie, Alan, Angela, Slipfox Socks. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that. I mean, I can't tell you how much it means to me. Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you want to help out too, if you ever feel like you've learned something or got something from my videos, consider supporting on Patreon. The link is right down here. You'll get access to our weekly secret live streams. One's happening right after this video, and our hidden Discord server, the Citadel. That's what allows me to do my work, spread this information and all that. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.